So, if you followed along with the basic time signatures, stuff like 4/4, 3/4, 2/2, type signatures like that, you might be wondering why there would be anything else. I mean, it seems like we can do everything we want to with these kinds of time signatures. For example, if we wanted to have, 4 quarter notes in a measure, well, we can just write 4/4. Remember, that reads 4 quarter notes in a measure. If we wanted, 3 half notes, we could write 3/2. It seems like we could cover just about everything this way. But there's actually a flaw in this system, and it has to do with this bottom number. Remember that this bottom number just represents a certain kind of note. So 4, for example, represents a quarter note. And you remember this, 2 represents a half note. Oops, half note. 1 would be a whole note. But there's a certain type of note that we actually can't represent with numbers like this. And that is what's called a dotted note. So if you haven't seen a dotted note before, they look like this. For example, this is what's called a dotted half note. Or like this. Here's a dotted quarter note, and here's a dotted whole note. And the way these work, it's actually pretty simple. When you put a dot onto a note, it makes it 50% longer. So for example, let's say we're in 4/4. That would mean that a half note would be 2 beats. If we put a dot on it, it now equals 3. So figure it's 150% as long. 3. If we had a whole note, again, suppose we're in 4/4, that would be 4 beats. But if we made a dotted whole note, remember that dot adds 50%, so it becomes 6 beats. And the one we're actually most interested in today is a dotted quarter note. So assume that this quarter note equals 1 beat. That means a dotted quarter note would equal 1.5. Remember, it's 1.5 times as long. And this is the note we're going to have trouble with. So let's suppose that we had a measure and we wanted to put 2 dotted quarter notes in it, like this. And we need to come up with a time signature for this. Well, the top number is easy enough. It would be 2, but this bottom number, we really don't have anything to represent this. I mean, a quarter note is a 4, an eighth note is an 8, but we really just don't have anything to represent a dotted quarter note. So what we're stuck with, what we have to do is we have to come up with something that's equivalent. So we have to kind of make some substitutions here. So to start with, quarter note should be equal to 2 eighth notes. And if that's true, and since a dotted quarter note is 1.5 times as long, that means that a dotted quarter note should be equal to 3 of them. I'll just write them like this for now. Okay, so that means that we could replace these 2 dotted quarter notes with 6 eighth notes, like this. Now this is actually pretty easy to write in a time signature. We could say there are 6 eighth notes in a measure. That's easy enough. And that's kind of what we're stuck with. If we wanted to do 2 dotted quarter notes, we really have no way to write that. So we have to kind of swap them out and say, okay, well, it is true that there would be 6 eighth notes in a measure. So we have to start thinking about the beat structure of this measure here. Now, if you came to this just kind of out of the blue, at first glance, you might think, okay, well, there's 6 eighth notes in a measure, so it's probably 6 beats. Like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. But you have to remember that what we originally wanted was this. And this looks a lot more like 2 beats. And that's really what we want here too. What we want is for these first 3 beats, for these first 3 notes to make up the first beat. So here's beat 1. And these last 3 to make up beat 2. And that's actually why, if you see a song written in 6/8, it almost always looks like this. You always have the eighth notes beam together in groups of 3 to help show that this is the first beat and this is the second beat. Like that. Now what's really interesting about this particular rhythm is that each beat breaks up into 3 parts. Our first beat has 3 parts to it, and our second beat has 3 parts to it. And that's pretty different from what we're used to with the simple time, or something we covered before, like say 2/4. 2/4 would be 2 quarter notes in a measure, or we could write that as 2 pairs of eighth notes. But here's the first beat, here's the second beat, and they break into 2 parts. And that's true of any of the other time signatures like 3/4, 4/4, 2/2, all of those. All the time the beat breaks into 2 pieces, whereas here it breaks into 3. So there's like a fundamental difference here. When the beat breaks into 3 parts, like 6/8, we call it compound time. And I've been using this word a lot, but it actually has a real musical meaning. Simple time means that the beats break into 2 parts. There's a really big difference between these two. So I'll give you a quick example of this just so you can kind of hear it in context. The piano's off camera here, but I'll just play it for you so you can hear it. I'm going to play the same chord progression, but I'll play it in 2/4, and then I'll play it in 6/8. So here's what it would sound like in 2/4. If you counted it out, it'd be 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and... You get the idea. Here it is in 6/8. Here, each beat has 3 parts to it. Just like that. And as you can tell, it's actually a really big difference. It has a very different feel to it. And that's the big difference between simple time and compound time. Okay, so one more issue with 6/8 before we leave it alone. How do we count this out? And that's actually a little tricky. So the simplest way would be just to say, we'll count it out as 1 and 2 and... that would sound like this. 1 and 2 and 1 and 2 and... And that actually makes a lot of sense, but we'll run into trouble down the road. So, and the reason we would is because let's say we wanted to actually put in faster notes. You say we wanted to do substitute out one of these eighth notes for 2 16th notes. That's totally legal. Then we don't really have a good way to count that. We're going to run out of vowel sounds or whatever to try to mark all 6 little parts of this beat. So what you almost always do, and this is actually really confusing on top of everything else, is you would go ahead and just count this up to 6. You count it as 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, like that. And this makes it even worse because now it really looks like there's 6 beats here. But you have to remember that there's not. This beat here gets an accent, or this note here gets an accent because it's right on the first beat. And this note here gets an accent. That's on the second beat. You would count it 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. You would not count it like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. That's making it sound as if there's 6 individual beats, and there absolutely isn't. And now in this case, if we needed to do 16th notes, it'd be really easy. We could just count, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 5 and 6 and just like that. Okay, so couple quick things before I go. You should have a pretty good handle on compound time now. There are a couple others that are worth looking at, but if you understand 6/8, they're very simple. 9/8 should make perfect sense. If we couldn't figure out a way to write 2 dotted quarter notes, we had to go with 6/8. If we wanted to write 3 dotted quarter notes, we'd have to do 9/8. And we count it out the same way. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. Remember, there's an accent here, there, and there. Now the other one you might run into is 12/8. Same idea, really. 12/8 would be 4 beats in a measure now, or 4 dotted quarter notes. And in this case, you actually could count this all the way up to 12, but it gets a little awkward. Saying 10, 11, 12, it's just kind of hard to say. So a lot of times what you'll do is just count to 6 twice. Almost treat it like it's 2 measures of 6/8. 7, oops. It's really hard to talk and write. You should try it sometime. Okay. You probably just count it like that. It's simple. Okay, and that pretty much takes care of most of these compound time signatures. 6/8, 9/8, and 12/8 all represent compound time. The one other one you might run into would be 3/8, and this one's actually a little different. It seems like it ought to be compound time. You would think that it would be a measure of 1 dotted quarter note, but a measure of 1 beat doesn't make much sense. That's essentially saying that you're grouping all the beats into groups of 1. In a group of 1, it's almost like not grouping them at all. So in the case of 3/8, you would actually treat that like a measure of 3/8 notes, and each one would get its own beat. So you would count this as 1, 2, 3, and each one is its own beat. And that pretty much covers it. So I think that's more than enough to digest this week. I think I'm going to do one more lesson on time signatures and rhythm, and I want to cover some of the really oddball stuff like 7/8 or something weird like 14/16, or just odd things like that that don't really fit into any particular category. And I'll probably go over some of the more subtle points of rhythm too, just kind of general stuff. And after that, we'll be back to writing music, I believe. So again, thanks for watching. This is probably the worst one out of the series on rhythm. So if you got through this lesson, you're in pretty good shape. So thanks very much, and I'll see you next time.